Today I'm going to tell you a story, but before I do, I'm going to ask a question. Have you ever noticed that a lot of people, after they've been through something very, very difficult, will take that energy and strength and resilience that they found and pour it into a project? They do something new. Sometimes they write books. A lot of people who've gone through grief will write books, poetry. I know someone who started a memorial garden. People organize awareness for different diseases or become mental health advocates. Sometimes people change careers so that they can better work with someone who is walking a difficult path that's similar to what they've experienced. That's the case for some who went into chaplaincy, which was quite a feeder for the degree that I finished. I have a Master of Arts in Theology and Leadership, and about a third of my class has gone into chaplaincy. Chris and Dari, who work with me, they became certified bereavement doulas, which is someone who walks with a person who is experiencing a very traumatic or difficult pregnancy, since both of them had experience with that also led into the loss of children. So it's really common, I think, for people to find a cause after they've been through a significant grief. For me, after I finished my degree, I didn't have a specific direction that I was going to go. And one thing that happened was when I was visiting my son, who had a brand new baby, I thought to myself, this is what I could do. I could just focus on my kids and my grandkids. And as soon as I had that thought in my mind, the Lord's voice said, no, that's not what I want for you. I have things that I want you to do. And so then I started to wonder what those things might be. Well, one thing I found was that I needed to start a podcast. And that was difficult because I'm not naturally a person who enjoys either social media or technology. And so that took me about a year to figure out how to do. And finally, the only way I figured it out was by finding people who were doing that kind of work and could walk me through how to do that. So that's how this came about. Another thought that I had very strongly is that I needed to write down my experience with my late husband, being married to him, what it was like to meet someone who was widowed, to date someone who was widowed, to be married and raising children who were grieving, what it was like to experience his illness and the challenges that came with that, but then also how resilient he was in the course of the challenges that he had. It was really remarkable to see somebody dedicate themselves so fully to living life and being a good and kind and present person in my life and in the lives of his children and his patients as well. He definitely was a better doctor after he became sick because he had an extra measure of compassion that comes from understanding. The third thing that I had an impression about was that I needed to put a statue of Jesus in the cemetery where Steve's buried. That cemetery out there is very, very plain. It's a fairly new cemetery, and it's small. And so there's a few trees, but there's really not a lot there. And this is the story I want to tell you, is how that came about. So what happened was, because I was widowed and not working, I had a lot of free time. And one thing I was able to do is travel around and visit different family members. I had a brother who was moving from Utah to Florida. And so I was able to go with his family and help drive one of their vehicles and just be a travel companion. And we got to Florida. We went to church. And as I was sitting in church, I had, just clear as anything I've ever seen in my mind, this picture came. And in my mind's eye, I saw a statue of Jesus, and I saw a very specific hymn written out across the front of this granite, what I now know is called a columbarium. A columbarium is a container, it can be a different size when you see places where urns are placed. I believe when it's inside, it's a mausoleum, but when you have a big box, for lack of a better term, out in the open that is enclosed, where you can place urns, it's called a columbarium. Anyway, so I saw this large columbarium with a statue of Jesus in the middle with his arms outstretched, with the words of this particular hymn. The hymn that I saw engraved across it was called a poor wayfaring man of grief, and it's a beautiful, beautiful hymn. Anyway, I saw this, and I immediately took the paper program and I sketched it out in my very bad art. And I thought, I knew that I was supposed to try to make this happen. So I went about, I mean, how do you put a statue in a cemetery? I didn't know the first thing about that. But I contacted the cemetery office, and I talked to Isaac. We had worked together, for several years. As a matter of fact, I'm going to back up now, and I'm going to share this story about how we even ended up having 12 plots in a cemetery. That seems excessive, but it's true. We owned 12 plots in a cemetery before Steve even passed away. The story for that is that my late husband's father had grown up in northern Tennessee, and his family history came from this part of Kentucky and Tennessee, where bordered southern Kentucky and northern Tennessee. And we went back there many, many years ago, probably 8, 9, 10 years ago. We went back there just to go see where his dad had grown up, see the farm that his parents had owned. It was a really neat trip. We took our youngest daughter with us and one of our nieces and her husband. And we had a great visit. But one thing that we wanted to do while we were there is we wanted to go see the different family cemeteries. Now, I'm from the West. I grew up in Oregon. I live in Washington now. And it's not very common out here in the West to have family cemeteries. Sometimes people might have a family plot in a cemetery. But back on the East Coast, it's actually pretty common. And in the South, it's very common to have a family cemetery. So when we went back there to see where Steve's dad had grown up, we went and visited different family cemeteries. We saw the Flowers Cemetery and the Stockton Cemetery and the Craig Cemetery. And it was really a powerful thing to see all of these gravestones close together of people that were related to each other and had known each other. And these were names we knew because we had been tracking our family history. And so it was so meaningful to us that when we came back to Washington from this trip, we decided that we were going to purchase enough plots in a cemetery to have our own little family cemetery in the cemetery. And so we had bought plots, but we hadn't done anything with it. And we always assumed that we would, put some kind of Craig, somewhere to designate this area as the Craig Family Cemetery. But that hadn't happened. So it was significant that when I had this vision in my mind of a statue of Christ, it had really very little to do with Craig or the name Craig or the family Craig, other than that it is still a family plot. But the statue of Jesus was really meant to be for everyone who visited the cemetery. So coming back to this, again, do you know how to find somebody to put, to do a statue for your cemetery? I had a hard time because, for one thing, it's extraordinarily expensive if you're going to do something that is of any significant height or, grandeur. And I found that it was very, very hard to find examples of statues that were already created. The statue of Christ that I'm the most familiar with is Torvald's statue in a church in Denmark. That is the Christus that Latter-day Saints are familiar with from Temple Square in Salt Lake City. There's a very, very large statue of Christ there, and there's a copy of that statue's in the visitor center of the Rome Latter-day Saint Temple. And that's the statue that I was trying to find, but the largest statue I could find of that was 36 inches tall, which is really not very big. So I was trying to think about this, and I remembered that I had visited a sculpture garden in Utah called The Light of the World, and it's a series of statues from the life of Christ. And I remember how much that had impacted me when I had been there. So I thought, okay, well, I can find that sculptor. And I went online, I looked her up. Her name is Angela Johnson. And I looked on her website, and she takes commissions. So I sent her an email, and I told her my story. I told her that my husband had passed away, but that I felt really compelled that I needed to put a statue of Jesus in the cemetery where he was buried. And she emailed me back, and she said, I'm intrigued by your story. Call me tomorrow and let's talk. So that started me on a really wonderful journey of getting to know this amazing sculptor, Angela Johnson. She has her own story. She had set out in life to be an opera singer and had worked very, very hard for decades. And one day just truly came to her that this was not going to happen. And in response to her grief, of this dream kind of coming to a close, she stopped at an art supply store, grabbed some clay and a little trowel, and went home and sculpted an amazing little sculpture of a sad little girl crying, and had no idea that her hands were magically adapted for sculpture. And that brought her down a completely different path where now she has done, oh my goodness, it's not even dozens. She's probably done hundreds of incredible, beautiful statues from all sorts of subjects, but specifically from the life of Christ. And if you ever have a chance to see the Light of the World or the Tree of Life installments at Thanksgiving Point in Utah, I would definitely encourage you to do it. It's just incredible what she's done. Massive, massive sculptures representing scenes from Christ's life. So I got to go to her studio and I got to see how she did her whole process, and it was incredible. But one thing that she told me was, she said, I don't have time for a commission, but I am working on a statue of Jesus right now that I do believe will work for you. So we'll do that. What we decided was that this statue she was working on for her current installation, which is the Tree of Life, it's a representation of this journey that people make from their disknowledge of God towards this Tree of Life, which represents the perfect love of God. And Jesus is standing in front of this with his arms outstretched, while all around are others trying to find their way to the Tree of Life. And then on the side is this building of those who are mocking the ones who are trying to take this path. It's a great parable in sculpture. But she said, I think this statue will be perfect for you, and so we'll cast it once for your cemetery up in Washington, and then we'll do the second cast for my installation here, which was just amazing that she would allow me to use that image in our cemetery. So that's what we did, and I learned a lot about the process of how a bronze statue is made. It's fascinating. So starting with the sketch I had, I needed to be able to translate this into something real. So one thing I did was I sent my sketch to my brother. My brother Ben works down in Las Vegas, Nevada, and if you have ever been at the Bellagio Hotel, they have an atrium where several times a year there is a theme that is brought to life through sculpture and plants, specifically flowers. And my brother does a lot of the work that goes into getting those installations from an idea to reality. So there are just amazing things. Like I remember, you can, like one thing, for example, that my brother worked on was a giant lion cub, right? And the lion, I mean, it must have been, I don't know, 12 feet tall, 9 feet tall, something. Obviously, I have no kind of scale in my head, but they used different grass seeds, for example, to make it look like he had, fur. It's just so cool. Or they used preserved roses and put them very close together to make colors, to make it look like something's been, painted. These hot air balloons that were totally encased in preserved roses. They're just amazing, beautiful. Anyway, he does that work, and so he took the sketch that I sent him and he put it in, and he put it into his program that then created a 3D visual for the cemetery and for the granite company to look at and see, okay, this is what we're going for. We're trying to do this. So we started on this process. Now, it took about a year, maybe even more than a year, to go from a statue that was, when I met Angela, this statue was 24 inches tall, which is how they are. And then they go through this different casting and imaging process, and then it is made, to its regular monument size, which is around 8 or 9 feet. And then the granite, the granite had to be, cut and engraved and put together. And so it took a very long time from the time I had sat in church and had this vision in my mind until the actual installation. Now, in the process of this, I had to make massive down payments. And if you've ever bought a gravestone, you can probably start to guess that this was going to be a hugely expensive project. So how was that going to happen? Now, that is also a great part of the story. Before my husband passed away, Steve was a dermatologist. He had 2 partners, and they had built an office building, and but the 3rd floor of this office building had not been built out yet. And one of the long-term projects was that they were going to build it out as a surgical suite. And so there was a certain amount that each partner was going to need to contribute towards this build out. And so that amount we had earmarked and had sitting separate from our regular investments and finances. And so when Steve passed away, without that 3rd partner, the other 2 partners went in a different direction. And so that money that had been earmarked for the surgical suite wasn't going to be needed. Now, the interesting thing about that is that I decided to use that to pay for this installation. And when all was said and done, and every single person had been paid along this process, it was almost to the penny what had been set aside for this business purpose. So I absolutely felt like I had used the money in the right way, but it still was blowing my mind. And I remember putting the last check in the mail and then driving on the freeway, and I just kept shaking my head thinking, I can't believe I wrote a check for that much money. It just was kind of blowing my mind, and having some doubt at the time. And just clear as day, I perceived Steve saying to me, who cares about dermatology anyway? This is the legacy that I want to leave with people. And what was meant by that was, the legacy was that he tried his whole life to be a disciple of Christ. And having this statue in the cemetery was symbolic for him, saying, this is my final testimony. This is what I want to leave with people. The engravement in the front of the statue, besides the poem, the hymn, A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief, it's taken from John 11:25, where Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. And so this is what people see when they come out there, and this is what I know that Steve believed. And then I felt like I had done the right thing. And I just want to close by saying, I truly do believe that through Christ's mediation, we will all live again. We will see our loved ones. I will see Steve, and we can have peace despite our temporary separation. This work that I felt called to do has filled me with a lot of purpose and meaning after a very, very heartbreaking experience. I didn't think I would be widowed in my 50s. And I'm grateful for the life that I was able to have with Steve. And I'm grateful that I can have conversations with people who are going through significantly difficult things. And I'm thankful that it's not foreign to me when they talk about their experiences, what they've been through. This statue, again, is something, it's a gift for all who are grieving. It's in the cemetery. Anyone can walk up to it. There are little benches next to it where somebody can sit and ponder and think. And people will send me pictures of their little children holding Christ's hand. They read the inscription and get to ponder what that means. I am the resurrection and the life. On the back of the statue is an inscription dedicated to Steve, and this is what I put on the back there, and this is what I will end with. It says, "Dedicated to the memory of Dr. Stephen David Craig by his wife Julie. We will surely meet again, my darling, at Jesus' feet." Thank you for listening. I hope as you go through your time of grief that you find hope and purpose that will give your life some direction and peace from the difficult experiences that you've had.